the Babybelt build video. So we have just finished the base. Let's build the gantry. So the first thing we're going to do is grab some motors and the printed parts and the other parts. So here's some motors. Let's get to work. Take the motors and they're keyed. They go on the shafts. So you want to get them all the way down on the shafts, which can sometimes take a little bit of force, but they're supposed to be a friction fit, so that makes sense. If you have to use more force, just take one of the bearings, pop it on there, and gently give it some percussive maintenance. There we go, and it's on. I'll take another motor, and we will do the same thing. This one's fighting me a little bit. There we go. Alright, so one motor goes into this end cap here. This is the X, and I like to build the X before I build the Y because it just makes things easier that way with the belt tensioning. So I'll go ahead and get this bearing here in here correctly. It's a tight fit. Oh dang, too tight of a fit. I cracked it. This is silk. I'll have to reinforce that. Some other people have had that problem, but I'm going to continue the build and we'll circle back and redesign this part later. Take the motor, pop it in there. Take some M3 by 10 screws. So I intentionally chose this build to use silk filament because I don't recommend silk, just to show you that I do break parts too sometimes, and also why not to use silk, as well as it's a learning experience, so I know on video recording what we need to work on. It was recommended to me to make the bearing seats to be octagonal instead of round, so that the compliance would be better. And I can absolutely see why. Alright, take some more bearings. This is the part that goes on the X-axis, the X motor end stop, and this is the X dowel. If yours slides out, there is a hole that you can put filament in to lock it in place, since the pin sits upside down in relation to gravity. But I have not seen that to be needed yet. So there it is. Now this is the X slider. Make sure it's all nice and clean on the bottom here. Yes, Bert. And we're going to take some 3mm ID by 4mm OD PTFE tubing. And feed it through here. And measure it. So that we have two pieces to use as a linear bearing for the X-axis. Take some zip ties. And I like feeding them through in a way that the ties will not all cluster in the middle, by taking them and feeding them through like this. PTFE tubing, and it should fit now in between the cutout notches. This one doesn't, so I'm going to trim it up just a little bit. I'm going to do these loosely because we don't have the rod in yet and we don't want to malform it. And I'll stick the rod in and tighten these up a little bit more. We don't want to get them He-Man tight, just enough that it holds the PTFE in place. And the PTFE, these rods are coated from the factory with a little bit of a sticky stuff. So, there we go. And my grandfather's here talking loudly, so I apologize for that too. All this background noise. There we go. Perfect. So they will slide, but they won't come out. So now we can trim these tails up. I don't like trimming them up so tight that you can't adjust them until the printer is good and ready. Okay, so now that's done. You can take the zip tie here, and the zip tie goes through this hole here, and then back down and around. There we go. So I'm going to start the zip tie but not pull it tight. There we go. So now the zip tie loop is in there. Grab some belt. We're going to start here. So we're going to need a loop. So this needs to be, I'm just going to guess this and circle back. Alright, so take the belt. It needs to be tooth side down in here. So that's tooth side there. And then we'll zip tie this up nice and tight. And I'll take it and feed it. Put the bearing block on. And I'll make sure these holes are not elephant footed, because it'll keep the rods from going in. Feed it in rod side first, and then down. So if it still doesn't fit, you can take a 2.5 millimeter Allen key and just massage it around. Just make sure the holes are nice and happy. I have chamfered these, but I guess I need to do them a little more. And again, I did this on a glass bed, so squish is important on a glass bed. Get it all nice and tight in there. The same thing over here. Yep. This goes on hole side first. I did that backwards. Sorry, some distractions here in the house right now. So it goes not through hole side first, but hole side last. So these holes here are cooperating. These holes here are not. So I will. There we go. Oops. There we go. Okay. So that's all happy there. So now, this is one of the tricky parts where everybody gets confused. We take a zip tie, and make sure the end is all curved towards back again. I stick it in through the little holes down in here. Push it and it should come back out again, just like that. So now we have an idea of where we want this end to loop up. So you're going to loop the belt. So it's going to terminate right inside that little cutout there. Take a zip tie. Put it over the belt. Zip tie it up nice and tight on the belt to form a little loop. Then we feed the zip tie we fed through the Y slider through the belt. And use that to tension everything. If you've done it right, you should have a nicely tensioned X-axis. Cut off the tail on this. There we go. Now we can cut the tails on these zip ties, especially that one. That one I like to leave a little bit of looseness on the looped one that goes through the block so that we can trim it up or tighten it up as necessary. We have the X-axis done. The Y-axis now. Take this part here. This is redesigned so it's less likely to break now. And I like putting the hot end on it now. Sorry, Birdie Bird's being loud again. Some people like to trim the boot on these. Some people like to just take them right off. But you can't print leaving it on and unmodified. Take the hot end with the block facing up. Take some screws. Actually, I'm sorry, I jumped a step. Take your fan shroud, put your fan on it, and this fan is facing the wrong way. These are M20 by 3 screws, or M3 by 20 screws. And the fan wire needs to face the same way as the hot end wires. And these tap directly into the plastic. Not great, but all it really needs to do is just hold the fan in place. So that goes up like that. That. And then we get this part here, and this all fits together like that. And then you take some M3 screws by 20, and you feed them through the hot end into the Y slider. And tap it on in. All right. That's all happy hunky-dory. You could even take an M3 screw and feed it through here. This is my first time with this redesigned part here. This little plastic tab on the outside of the fan would break all the time. But it looks like this redesign is a benefit. There you go. So, we have the Y slider mostly done. We need to PTFE tube it. done with the 3mm ID PTFE tubing now. Take some zip ties. Oh, that one's way too short. We're not done with 3mm PTFE tubing. We were if I could measure. There we go. All right. And then just as before, zip tie it in loosely. So we don't crush the PTFE tube before we put the metal rods in. Then we can take the last 2 metal rods, feed them into the Y slider, or X slider. Finish assembling the Y end stop. So the bearing goes in, the pin goes into and through. There we go. Then we use an M3 by 20 bolt in this hole here. That is our end stop adjustment. We need that so that we can set the end stop for sensorless homing, so that we're on the bed. Go about halfway. Take this guy here. The fan faces towards the X slider. Put the M3 rods in. As you can see, I didn't tighten them down enough. That's okay. Because there we go. Now we've got them in, we can cinch them up a little bit. There we go. Take this, pop it on the end here, and we're going to have to tune up these holes a little bit, just as before. There we go. We're on there, all nice and tight. So, the way this new part here works is we should have a plate somewhere. There it is. Yep. And so what we're going to do is we're going to feed the belt here up and around and down. And then it goes through the Y carriage here. I can kind of curl it a little bit. Not that much through, but through the Y carriage there. If we can hold on to it. And it goes inside, around. I cut it about here. Feed this guy through again. Take the motor. Take a 608. Pop the 608 into the X carriage. And we want to wait on doing the 608 into the X carriage until we have the X belt on, because the belt zip ties and stuff go underneath that. Take the gear. Put it in place. There we go. Need some M3 screws. I'm using M3 by 10s here. Alright, that's in place. Take a zip tie and bundle up the wires on the back here to help protect the motor, because this motor moves. We want all the stress from the motor moving back and forth not to be on where the wires enter the motor. So now we can worry about belt tension. I'm going to take an M20 or M3 by 20, an M3 nut. The M3 nut goes right in there. The M3 by 20 goes through here. This little lip on the bottom faces down. Hold the belt nice and tight. Flip it open. Let's take this in. Use my thumb to hold the nut in place. Get the bolt started. Oops. Except I missed the nut. I have to confess, this is my first time actually doing this. I had a friend do it last time, so I could watch and see how much they struggled. And he didn't seem to struggle too much, but I have heard other people say this is kind of a painful part of the build. So I guess I'll find out. There we go, tighten this down. Tighten this up. Tighten that up. So I'm going to take this and pull the belt nice and tight. Squeeze it together. Still a little loose. The belt doesn't need to be super tight, just tight enough that there's no slack in it. Oh, that wasn't too bad. We can tighten it up later as necessary. Cut these off, again leaving just a little bit of play on those tails in case we need to tighten them up more as things wear in. There we go. There's the gantry.